the mute millionaire groom, broke his silence the moment we were alone. After the ceremony, I should have known something was wrong when my husband spoke his first words to me, not because he finally spoke, but because of what he said. For 6 months, I'd believed Marcus Wellington couldn't speak. 6 months of sign language lessons, written notes, and silent dinners. 6 months of convincing myself that love transcends words, that our connection ran deeper than conversation. 6 months of playing the role of the understanding, compassionate wife-to-be to a man the world saw as a tragic figure, a self-made millionaire who'd lost his voice in the same accident that killed his parents. But the moment the last guest left our wedding reception, the moment the heavy oak doors of the Wellington estate closed behind us, Marcus turned to me with a smile I'd never seen before and said in a perfectly clear, deep baritone, "Well, Margaret, I suppose we should discuss the terms of our arrangement now." I'm 56 years old. I've raised 2 children, survived a divorce, built a successful interior design business, and thought I'd seen every shade of human deception. I was wrong. Let me start from the beginning because the ending is something I'm still living through, and it's nothing like I expected. 6 months earlier, the charity gala at the Pembroke Hotel was the kind of event I usually avoided. Too much pretense, too many people trying to outdo each other with their generosity, or at least the appearance of it. But my daughter, Claire, had insisted. She was on the organizing committee for the Children's Hospital Foundation, and my attendance was apparently non-negotiable. "Mom, you need to get out more," she'd said over lunch the previous week, her tone walking that careful line between concern and exasperation. It's been 3 years since the divorce. Dad's already remarried. To his 28-year-old paralegal, I'd interrupted. "Yes, I'm aware." Claire had the grace to wince. "I'm just saying, you're only 56. You're beautiful, successful, and you spend every evening alone with a glass of wine and HGTV. She wasn't wrong, but the truth stung nonetheless. After Richard left, taking 30 years of marriage and most of my confidence with him, I'd retreated into my work. My business had never been more successful, my bank account never fuller, and my heart never more carefully guarded. So I'd gone to the gala, wearing a navy dress Claire had picked out, my silver hair styled in a way my hairdresser promised was elegant but approachable. I'd planned to make an appearance, write a check, and be home by 10. That's when I saw him. Marcus Wellington stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, slightly apart from the crowd. Even in a room full of wealth and power, he commanded attention. Tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair silvered at the temples, and the kind of bone structure that would photograph well from any angle. He wore his tuxedo with the ease of someone born to wealth, but there was something in his eyes, a sadness maybe, or a loneliness, that I recognized. He was also, I would soon learn, completely silent. I noticed him watching me throughout the evening. Not in a predatory way, I'd experienced enough of that in the dating world to know the difference, but with genuine interest. When our eyes met, he smiled, and something in my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was my daughter who made the introduction. Claire knew everyone, and she practically dragged me across the ballroom floor. "Mom, I want you to meet Marcus Wellington. Marcus, this is my mother, Margaret Hartley." He took my hand, and I felt the warmth of his palm, the gentle pressure of his fingers. But instead of speaking, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather notebook. With elegant, unhurried movements, he wrote, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Margaret. Your daughter speaks very highly of you. I must have looked confused because Claire jumped in. Marcus can't speak, Mom. There was an accident." She stopped, clearly uncertain how much to share. Marcus wrote again. "Car accident 2 years ago. Lost my parents and my voice. But I've learned that communication goes far beyond words. The compassion I felt was immediate and overwhelming. Here was a man who'd lost so much, yet carried himself with such grace. We spent the rest of the evening in conversation, him writing, me speaking, both of us discovering a connection that felt almost inevitable. He wrote about his work in real estate development, his love of architecture, his foundation that supported veterans with PTSD. I talked about my design business, my children, my recent rediscovery of oil painting. The conversation flowed as easily as if we'd known each other for years. When the evening ended, he wrote, "Would you have dinner with me?" I promised to be a good listener. I surprised myself by saying yes. The courtship. Our relationship developed with a speed that both thrilled and terrified me. Marcus was attentive in a way I'd never experienced. He sent flowers, not roses, but peonies, because I'd mentioned once they were my favorite. He remembered every detail I shared, that I took my coffee black, that I loved Art Deco design, that my favorite movie was The Philadelphia Story. We communicated through notes, text messages, and the sign language I began learning with a dedication that surprised me. ASL became my evening passion, replacing the wine and HGTV Claire had teased me about. I wanted to speak to Marcus in his language, to meet him where he was. Our dates were unconventional. We visited art museums where we could stand in front of paintings and he'd write his interpretations on his phone. We took long walks in the botanical gardens, communicating with gestures and shared glances. We had dinner at his penthouse, where his chef prepared extraordinary meals, and Marcus would watch me with those intense dark eyes, occasionally writing something that made me laugh. The first time he kissed me, 3 weeks into our courtship, I understood that silence could be more intimate than any words. We were standing on his terrace, the city lights spread below us like scattered diamonds, and he'd cupped my face in his hands with such tenderness that I'd nearly wept. The kiss was soft, questioning, and when I responded, deepening it, I felt him smile against my lips. I fell in love with him. God help me. I fell completely, utterly in love. My children were less enthusiastic. Claire, who'd made the introduction, grew concerned about the speed of our relationship. My son, James, was outright suspicious. "Mom, you barely know this guy," James said during a tense family dinner. "He could be anyone. Just because he's rich and can't talk doesn't make him a good person." "He's not some guy," I'd replied, hearing the defensiveness in my voice. "His family is well known. He runs multiple successful businesses, and he makes me happy, something I haven't been in years." "Happy or flattered?" Claire had asked gently. "There's a difference." But I didn't want to hear it. For the first time since Richard had destroyed our marriage, I felt alive. Marcus made me feel seen, desired, valued. When he looked at me, I didn't see a middle-aged divorcee. I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone worthy of devotion. 3 months into our relationship, he proposed. We were at his beach house in the Hamptons, walking along the shore at sunset. He stopped, took both my hands, and knelt in the sand. The ring he offered was stunning, a vintage Art Deco piece with a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was perfect. The note he handed me said, "Margaret, you've brought joy back into my life when I thought I'd never feel it again. You see past my silence to who I really am. Will you marry me?" Through tears, I said yes. Red flags I ignored. Looking back, there were signs, small inconsistencies that my love-drunk brain dismissed or rationalized away. Marcus never wanted to meet my extended family. When I suggested introducing him to my sister or my college friends, he'd shake his head and write that he found large groups overwhelming, that his inability to participate in normal conversation made him anxious. He was oddly secretive about his past. I knew the basic facts. Old money family, educated at Yale, parents died in the accident that took his voice. But when I asked for details, he'd change the subject or claim the memories were too painful. His staff at the various properties, the penthouse, the beach house, the estate in Connecticut, were all new hires. When I commented on this, he wrote that he'd wanted a fresh start after the accident, that the old staff reminded him too much of his parents. He never wanted to use video calls, even though I suggested it might be easier than constantly texting. He'd write that he found seeing himself on screen depressing, a reminder of what he'd lost. And perhaps strangest of all, he was adamant about having a short engagement and a small private wedding. When I suggested waiting a year, getting to know each other better, he'd seemed almost panicked. The note he wrote was urgent. "Life is short, Margaret. I learned that the hardest way possible. I don't want to waste another moment. Please." How could I argue with that? A man who'd lost everything, who'd found love again, who didn't want to waste precious time. It seemed romantic, urgent, proof of the depth of his feelings. My children begged me to slow down. Claire cried. James threatened to boycott the wedding, but I was stubborn, defensive, convinced that they simply couldn't understand our connection. "You're being reckless," James had said during our last conversation before the wedding. "This isn't like you, Mom. You're rushing into this with a man you barely know." "I know him better than I ever knew your father," I'd snap back. "And look how that turned out. At least Marcus actually listens to me." The hurt in James's eyes had stung, but I'd been too caught up in wedding preparations to really process it. We'd scheduled the wedding for 6 months after we met, a small ceremony at Marcus's estate in Connecticut, just immediate family and a handful of close friends. I'd designed the aesthetic myself, elegant, timeless, with white roses and candlelight in the estate's library. It would be intimate, meaningful, perfect. The night before the wedding, alone in the guest room Marcus had prepared for me, I'd had a moment of doubt. I'd sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone. My sister's text message glowing on the screen. "It's not too late to wait. Nobody would judge you for postponing. Please think about this." But then Marcus had slipped a note under my door. "Tomorrow I get to wake up as your husband. I'm the luckiest man alive. Sleep well, my love." I'd pressed the note to my heart and told myself that everything would be fine. The wedding day. The wedding itself was beautiful. The library had been transformed exactly as I'd envisioned. The morning light streaming through the tall windows, the scent of roses filling the air. I wore a simple cream dress, elegant without trying too hard to recapture youth, and carried a bouquet of peonies. Claire and James were there, along with Claire's husband and their 2 children. My sister came, though her expression throughout the ceremony could only be described as worried. A handful of Marcus's business associates attended, people I'd met briefly during our courtship. Marcus looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit. When I walked down the makeshift aisle to stand beside him, the emotion in his eyes seemed genuine. We'd arranged for a friend of his, a judge, to perform a modified ceremony that accommodated Marcus's silence. When it came time for vows, I spoke mine aloud while Marcus presented me with a handwritten letter. I didn't read it then. We'd agreed I'd save it for later, but I clutched it as I spoke my promises to love, honor, and cherish him. The judge pronounced us husband and wife. Marcus kissed me, soft and sweet, and I heard Claire sniffling behind me. When I turned, I saw tears on her face. Though whether they were happy tears or something else, I couldn't tell. The reception was held in the estate's formal dining room. The meal was exquisite. The champagne flowed freely, and Marcus's hand found mine repeatedly throughout the afternoon. He seemed attentive, affectionate, exactly the devoted husband I'd imagined. But there was something in the way he looked at the clock, something in his posture that suggested impatience. I told myself he was eager for our guests to leave, eager for us to begin our life together in private. As the afternoon stretched into evening, guests began to depart. Claire hugged me tightly. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she whispered. "It's still not too late." "I'm married now, sweetheart," I'd said with a smile I hoped looked more confident than I felt. "It's a little late for cold feet." James's goodbye was stiff, formal. "Call me if you need anything," he said. "Anything at all. I'm serious." Finally, the last guest left. The caterers were packing up in the kitchen, but Marcus gestured that they should leave everything and go. Within minutes, the house was silent except for the two of us. We stood in the foyer, the massive space suddenly feeling oppressive rather than grand. Marcus took my hand and led me toward the library where we'd been married hours before. My heart was pounding. With anticipation, yes, but also with something that felt uncomfortably like dread. He closed the library doors behind us, turned to face me, and smiled. But it wasn't the gentle, loving smile I'd grown accustomed to. This smile had an edge to it, something almost predatory. And then he spoke. "Well, Margaret?" His voice was rich, cultured, absolutely perfect. "I suppose we should discuss the terms of our arrangement now." The truth revealed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard. You can speak," I managed to whisper. "Of course I can speak," Marcus said, walking to the bar and pouring himself a scotch. His movements were casual, relaxed, as if he hadn't just shattered my entire reality. "I've always been able to speak. Quite well, actually. My parents were sticklers for elocution. But the accident? There was no accident." He took a sip of his drink, studying me over the rim of the glass. "Well, not the kind you think. My parents are alive and well, enjoying their retirement in Monaco. They simply don't approve of my lifestyle choices, so we maintain a certain distance." The room spun. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "I don't understand. Why would you pretend to be mute?" He finished my sentence. "Oh, Margaret, that's the interesting part. That's what we need to discuss." He gestured for me to sit. When I didn't move, he shrugged and sat himself, crossing one long leg over the other with infuriating ease. "You see, I have a problem. Actually, several problems, but one in particular that you're going to help me solve. About a year ago, I made some questionable business decisions, investments that didn't pan out, partnerships with people who turned out to be less than trustworthy. Long story short, I'm in debt. Serious debt to the kind of people who don't accept sorry as payment. What does this have to do with me?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Your money, Margaret." He said it so simply as if it were obvious. "Your very considerable money. Your business is worth approximately $4 million. Your investment portfolio, thanks to your prudent divorce settlement and smart investing, is worth another $3 million. Your real estate holdings add another $2 million. That's $9 million, enough to clear my debts and give me a fresh start." The world tilted. You married me for my money? Don't look so shocked. People marry for money all the time. I just happened to use a rather unconventional approach." He swirled his scotch. "You see, I've learned that wealthy women of a certain age, no offense intended, are often lonely, often eager for romance, for someone to make them feel young and desired again. And they're especially vulnerable to the idea of being the noble caretaker, the understanding partner to someone who's suffered tragedy. This was all a lie." It wasn't a question. The courtship? Yes. The devotion? Exaggerated. The whole mute millionaire thing? Completely fabricated. He smiled. "Though I have to say, you made it easy. You were so eager to believe in our grand romance, to prove to your children that you weren't making a mistake, that you ignored every red flag I planted." "Why tell me now?" I asked, my mind racing through possible escapes, possible solutions. "Why not just keep up the pretense?" "Because I need you to sign some papers. Transfer documents, essentially. I need you to willingly merge your assets with mine, and then I need you to gracefully disappear from my life." "Don't worry," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "I don't mean anything sinister, just a quiet divorce, a settlement in your favor, say $200,000 for your trouble, and we both move on with our lives." "And if I refuse?" His smile turned cold. "Margaret, you're a smart woman. Think about what you're asking. We're married. Everything you have is now legally entwined with everything I have. You could fight this in court, certainly, But that would take months, possibly years. It would destroy your reputation, embarrass your children, and cost you far more in legal fees than you'd recover. Or you could sign my papers, take your settlement, and walk away with your dignity intact. Neither of us wants a messy public battle. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. How could you do this? Rather easily, actually. You wanted to believe in second chance romance. You wanted to prove you weren't a foolish, middle-aged woman who'd been traded in for a younger model. You wanted to feel special again. He finished his drink. I simply gave you what you wanted, for a price. The following days, Marcus, I could barely think his name without rage, had prepared a guest room for me. Take the night to think about it, he'd said before leaving me alone in the library. The papers will be ready tomorrow. I strongly suggest you sign them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the unfamiliar bed, my wedding dress crumpled on the floor, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Every moment of our courtship replayed in my mind, now tainted with the knowledge of his deception. The romantic notes, the thoughtful gifts, the patient sign language lessons I'd worked so hard at, all of it had been a performance. I was 56 years old and I'd never felt more foolish. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not again. Richard had taken my youth and my trust. Marcus thought he could take my dignity and my financial security. But I'd spent 3 years rebuilding myself, and I wasn't going to let another man destroy what I'd created. I needed information, I needed leverage, and I needed help. My phone had been in my purse, which was still in the library. I crept downstairs as the sun was rising, the house eerily quiet. I found my purse, grabbed my phone, and locked myself in a bathroom. First, I called James. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. Mom, is everything okay? No, I said quietly. Everything is very, very wrong. But I need you to not panic. I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I say. To his credit, James didn't interrupt. I told him everything, the revelation, the threats, the pressure to sign papers. When I finished, there was a long silence. Mom, we need to get you out of there. Pack a bag and... No. I interrupted. If I run, he wins. He'll say I abandoned the marriage, that I'm mentally unstable, God knows what else. I need to stay here, act compliant, and buy us time to figure out how to fight back. Mom, this guy is dangerous. He's been lying to you for months, which means he's a liar, not necessarily violent. I can handle this, James, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to contact that lawyer friend of yours, the one who specializes in fraud cases. Tell him everything I just told you, and I need you to be discreet. If Marcus finds out I'm building a case, this becomes much more difficult. After some more argument, James agreed. We worked out a system. I'd text him twice a day to confirm I was safe. If I missed a check-in, he'd call the police. Next, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the morning exploring the estate, looking for Marcus's study or office. I found it on the second floor, a massive room lined with bookshelves with a mahogany desk in the center. The door was unlocked, arrogant or careless. Either way, I took advantage. His computer was password protected, but his filing cabinets weren't. I began photographing documents with my phone, bank statements, business contracts, correspondence. Much of it was above my level of understanding, but I figured James's lawyer friend could make sense of it. What I did understand was chilling. The debt Marcus had mentioned wasn't just significant, it was catastrophic. He owed money to multiple creditors, some with addresses in countries I suspected didn't have strong legal systems. There were threatening letters, demands for payment, and increasingly desperate communications from Marcus trying to negotiate extensions. He hadn't been exaggerating. He really did need my money, desperately. But there was something else, something that didn't make sense. Among the financial documents were medical records, not for Marcus, but for someone named David Wellington. The dates were recent, within the past year. David Wellington. Marcus's brother? He'd never mentioned having a brother. I photographed everything and was returning files to their folders when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I barely managed to close the cabinet and step away from the desk before Marcus opened the door. "Good morning, wife," he said, his tone mocking. "Sleep well?" "What do you think?" I replied. He shrugged. "I have the papers ready. My lawyer will be here at noon. I suggest you make yourself presentable. We wouldn't want him to think anything was amiss in our happy marriage. And if I refuse to sign, then things become complicated for you. I have texts, emails, voicemails from you professing your love, your eagerness to combine our lives in every way. I have witnesses who will testify to our romantic courtship. If you fight me, I'll drag you through a legal battle that will cost you everything you're trying to protect. You'll end up broke and humiliated." He checked his watch. "Think about it. You have 2 hours." He left, closing the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded, then immediately sent the photos to James with a message. "Found these." "What do they mean?" His response came quickly. "Holy shit, Mom. I'm calling the lawyer now. Whatever you do, do not sign anything." The lawyer's visit. At noon precisely, a black Mercedes pulled up the circular driveway. A man in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. Marcus greeted him at the door. I watched from the upstairs landing, and their conversation was brief, businesslike. "Margaret!" Marcus called up the stairs. "Our guest has arrived." I descended slowly, giving myself time to compose my face into something neutral. The lawyer introduced himself as Gerald Hutchins. He had the smooth, practiced demeanor of someone who'd facilitated countless unpleasant transactions. We settled in the library, the same room where we'd been married, where Marcus had revealed his deception. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mrs. Wellington," Hutchins began, spreading papers on the table, "I understand you and your husband wish to consolidate your assets. A wise decision for newlyweds. These documents simply formalize the transfer of your business holdings and investments into joint accounts that Mr. Wellington will manage." "How thoughtful of him," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. Marcus shot me a warning look. "Margaret's a bit overwhelmed by all the legal language. Perhaps you could explain in simpler terms?" As Hutchins droned on about asset transfers and account consolidations, I pretended to listen while my mind raced. James's lawyer, Robert Chen, had sent me a text an hour ago. "Don't sign anything. We're looking into your husband's background. What we're finding is concerning. Buying time is critical." But how much time did I have? Marcus was watching me with barely concealed impatience. I needed a strategy. "This all seems very rushed," I said, interrupting Hutchins mid-sentence. "We've only been married a day. Surely these arrangements can wait." "Actually," Hutchins said smoothly, "from a tax perspective, immediate consolidation is advantageous. There's really no benefit to waiting. I'd like my own lawyer to review these documents first." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's unnecessary, darling. Gerald is representing both our interests. I'm sure he's very competent, but I'd feel more comfortable having independent counsel review such significant financial decisions." "Margaret." Marcus's voice had an edge now. "We discussed this. The whole point is to simplify our affairs, not complicate them with multiple lawyers and endless negotiations." "Then you should have married someone less cautious with her money," I replied sweetly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Hutchins cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow. Give Mrs. Wellington time to review the documents at her leisure." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're settling this today." "Actually," I stood up, "I'm not feeling well. Too much excitement, I suppose. Mr. Hutchins, I apologize for wasting your time. Marcus, I'm going to lie down." I left the room before either of them could object. Behind me, I heard Marcus's angry voice and Hutchins' conciliatory murmurs, but I didn't stop. I went to my room, the guest room, not the master bedroom Marcus presumably expected me to share, and locked the door. My phone rang immediately. "James. Mom, Chen found something. Marcus Wellington isn't his real name. Or rather, he's not the Marcus Wellington everyone thinks he is. What do you mean? There are two Marcus Wellingtons, brothers. The real Marcus, the one who actually built the real estate empire, the one from the old money family, has been in a care facility for the past 18 months. Early onset dementia. The man you married is David Wellington, the younger brother who's been pretending to be Marcus and slowly draining his brother's assets. The room spun. That's identity theft. That's fraud on a massive scale. It's multiple felonies. Chen's already contacted the FBI. They've been investigating David for months, apparently, but didn't have enough evidence. Your documents might be exactly what they need. Oh my God, James, if he finds out... You need to get out of there, now. Pack a bag and leave. Chen says the FBI can be there in 2 hours, but you can't stay in that house with him knowing what we know. If I leave now, he'll know something's up. He'll run, won't he? Disappear before the FBI can arrest him? Mom, I don't care about justice right now. I care about your safety. I took a deep breath, thinking fast. What if I could keep him here? Keep him thinking I'm going to sign? The FBI needs time to get here and build their case, right? Absolutely not. You're not bait in a criminal investigation. I'm not asking your permission, James. Call your lawyer friend. Tell him to contact the FBI. Tell them I'll cooperate fully, but I need them here as soon as possible. Mom, I'm doing this. Just make the calls. I hung up before he could argue further and checked my appearance in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my makeup smudged from stress and tears. Good. I looked exactly how a confused, overwhelmed new bride should look. Playing the part. I waited 20 minutes before going back downstairs, long enough for Marcus, David, I corrected myself, to think I'd been sufficiently cowed, short enough that he wouldn't come looking for me. He was alone in the library, Hutchins apparently dismissed. He looked up when I entered, his expression guarded. Margaret, and feeling better? No, I said honestly. I'm completely overwhelmed. This is all happening so fast. His posture relaxed slightly. I know it seems like a lot, but truly these are standard procedures for married couples combining finances. I forced my voice to shake. I wasn't expecting any of this. You know my history with Richard, how he controlled everything. The idea of giving up financial independence is terrifying. I watched him calculate his response, saw the moment he decided which approach to take. He crossed the room and took my hands, his touch gentle. The same touch that had once made my heart race and now made my skin crawl. Margaret, I'm not Richard. This isn't about control. It's about partnership, about building a life together. He stroked my cheek. But if you need time to adjust, we can take things slower. Maybe just transfer the business first, leave the investment accounts for now? You'd do that? I made my voice hopeful, grateful. Of course. I want you to feel comfortable. His smile was warm, but his eyes were calculating. We have our whole lives ahead of us. There's no rush. Liar, I thought. You're desperate. Every day that passes is another day your creditors are closing in. Thank you, I whispered. That means so much. Can we maybe wait until tomorrow? I know it's only one more day, but I'd like tonight to just be about us, our first full day as husband and wife. I saw the frustration flash across his face, quickly masked. Tomorrow, he agreed. First thing in the morning, we'll call Hutchins back and take care of the business transfer. Does that sound reasonable? Very reasonable. I squeezed his hands. I'm sorry I'm being so difficult. I do want to make this work. I know you do. He pulled me into an embrace, and I forced myself not to stiffen, not to pull away. Why don't we have dinner? We can open that wine I've been saving, have a proper wedding night celebration. Wedding night. The implications made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression pleasant. That sounds lovely. I should probably freshen up first. I'm sure I look a mess. You look beautiful, he said automatically, but take your time. I'll have the chef prepare something special. I escaped back upstairs and immediately texted James. Bought us time until tomorrow morning. How long until FBI arrives? They're mobilizing now, should be there by evening. Mom, please be careful. Evening. I had to maintain this performance for several more hours. I could do this. I'd acted my way through years of a failing marriage, pretending everything was fine when Richard was already planning his exit. I could act my way through one more night. I showered, changed into a casual dress, nothing that suggested seduction, and steeled myself for dinner. The final performance dinner was an elaborate affair. David had outdone himself, or rather, had his chef outdo himself. Multiple courses, expensive wine, candlelight. It was exactly the romantic wedding dinner I might have dreamed of, now transformed into something sinister. David was charming, attentive, playing the role of devoted husband with the same skill he'd used to play the mute millionaire. He told stories about his childhood, his business successes, his plans for our future. All lies, I now knew, or at least heavily embroidered versions of his brother's life. To us, he said, raising his wine glass, to new beginnings. New beginnings, I echoed, taking a small sip. I needed to stay sharp. As the meal progressed, David grew more relaxed. The wine loosened his tongue, and I realized he was actually enjoying himself, playing house, pretending this was a real marriage. Maybe, I thought with a chill, he'd done this before. Maybe I wasn't his first victim. Tell me something, I said as we finished dessert. How long did it take you to plan all this? The mute act, the romance, everything. His eyes sharpened, but he kept his tone light. What do you mean? I'm just curious. It must have taken tremendous discipline, never speaking, keeping up the pretense. When did you decide I was the right target? Target is such an ugly word. He refilled his wine glass. I prefer to think of it as recognizing an opportunity. You were perfect, successful, lonely, eager to believe in romance. And you were at that charity gala, which meant you had money to spare for good causes. Why not for a good husband? And the sign language? You must have actually learned it. I did. Spent 2 months perfecting it before I even approached you. Commitment to the role, you know. He seemed almost proud. The hardest part was not laughing at some of the earnest things you'd say. You were so determined to make our unique communication work. Each word was a knife, but I kept my expression neutral. It's impressive, really. I never suspected. No, you didn't. He studied me. You're taking this remarkably well. I expected more anger, more tears. What good would that do? You've made the situation clear. Tomorrow I'll sign your papers, take my settlement, and we'll both move on. I met his eyes. I'm just trying to understand who I actually married. Fair enough. He leaned back in his chair. Since we're being honest now, want to know the truth? The whole truth? I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded. My brother Marcus is the golden child. Perfect in every way, successful, charming, generous. Our parents always compared us. Why can't you be more like Marcus? Why can't you apply yourself like Marcus? Everything I did was measured against his success and found lacking. He paused to drain his wine glass. When Marcus got sick, when his mind started to go, I saw an opportunity. I'd been his financial advisor. He trusted me. It was easy to move him into a private facility, tell people he wanted privacy during his recovery. Easy to step into his life, his business, his identity. For the first time, I got to experience what it was like to be Marcus Wellington, respected, admired, successful. But you weren't successful, I said quietly. You were bleeding his money. Details. He waved dismissively. I made some bad investments, had some expensive habits. The money ran out faster than I expected. But then I realized Marcus would want a wife eventually, wouldn't he? Someone to share his golden life with? And what better way to replenish the coffers than to find a wealthy widow looking for love? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Before I could respond, I heard the sound I'd been waiting for. car engines on the driveway, multiple vehicles. David heard it too. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Who did you invite?" "I didn't invite anyone." I stayed seated, my heart pounding. "Maybe it's your creditors?" His face went white. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "What did you do?" I protected myself. I stood now, my voice steady. "I called my lawyer. He made some calls. Turns out impersonating your brother, stealing his identity, defrauding his investors, those are serious federal crimes." "You bitch." He moved toward me, but before he could reach me, the front door burst open. "FBI! David Wellington! Hands where we can see them!" The aftermath. The next hours were a blur of federal agents, questions, and statements. They'd been investigating David for months, but my documentation, the photos I'd taken from his office, the timeline of our relationship, the marriage certificate, gave them what they needed for immediate arrest. David was charged with identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other crimes. The real Marcus Wellington, it turned out, was being cared for in a facility in Vermont, his condition stabilized but irreversible. His estate was in shambles, but at least he'd been found. As for my marriage, it was annulled within weeks. You can't have a legal marriage when the groom isn't who he claims to be. I didn't lose a penny, though David had certainly tried to position himself to take everything. James and Claire were remarkable through it all. No, I told you so. Just support and love. They helped me deal with the media attention, the story of the mute millionaire who wasn't turned out to be tabloid gold, and stood by me as I processed the betrayal. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my living room now, the one I've lived in for 20 years, the one I almost gave up for a lie. My granddaughter is playing at my feet, building an elaborate block tower. Claire is making tea in my kitchen. James called this morning just to check in. The story made me briefly famous, or infamous, depending on how you looked at it. The woman who married a liar wasn't exactly the legacy I'd imagined, but something unexpected came from it. I started getting calls from other women who'd been scammed by romance frauds, who'd lost money to con artists, who'd been manipulated by men who saw their loneliness as an opportunity. They wanted to talk to someone who understood, who'd been through it and survived. I started a support group, then another. Now I speak at events about romance fraud, about the warning signs, about protecting yourself without closing yourself off to genuine connection. My story, humiliating as it was, is helping others avoid the same fate. And David, he's serving 15 years in federal prison. The real Marcus Wellington's family sued him for every penny, though there wasn't much left to recover. I heard through the legal grapevine that he's writing a book about his brilliant con. I'm sure he sees himself as some kind of criminal mastermind rather than a jealous brother who destroyed lives out of spite. As for me and romance, I'm done with it. Not in a bitter way. I'm just finally content with myself. I have my work, my family, my causes. I paint on weekends. I travel when I want. I've discovered that being alone and being lonely are two very different things. My daughter brings me a cup of tea and sits beside me. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." I brace myself, but she's smiling. "Remember Susan from the hospital foundation? She wants to set you up with her brother. He's a retired professor, widowed, very normal. I told her you'd think about it." Claire: I know, but hear me out. Coffee only. Public place. I'll even come along if you want. He's genuinely nice and he's been vetted. I had James run a background check. Despite myself, I laugh. You had your brother run a background check on your friend's brother? After what happened, I'm running background checks on everyone. She squeezes my hand. You don't have to say yes. But you also don't have to let one terrible man ruin the possibility of connection for you. I look at my granddaughter, still building her tower with determined focus. I think about all the women I've talked to, all the stories of betrayal and resilience. I think about the life I've rebuilt, strong and independent, and mine. Coffee, I finally say, in a very public place. And you're coming. Claire beams. Deal. Will I ever trust completely again? Probably not. But I've learned something valuable through all of this. Being careful isn't the same as being closed off. Protecting yourself doesn't mean isolating yourself. And surviving a con doesn't make you a fool. It makes you a survivor. The mute millionaire broke his silence and tried to break me, but I broke free instead and discovered that my own voice, the one I'd been quietly suppressing for years, first in my marriage to Richard and then in my eagerness to please David, was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Some stories don't have happy endings in the traditional sense. There's no perfect romance, no knight in shining armor, no sunset ride into forever. But there's something better. There's truth, resilience, and the hard-won knowledge that you can survive being shattered and put yourself back together, maybe even stronger than before. And sometimes, that's the best ending of all. Epilogue. A year after my annulment, I received a letter. It was from Marcus Wellington, the real Marcus Wellington. His condition had improved slightly with new medication, and he'd been told the full story of what his brother had done. His letter was shaky but legible. Dear Mrs. Hartley, I cannot apologize enough for what my brother did using my name. The shame I feel knowing that he hurt you while pretending to be me is immeasurable. You saved my life, in a way. By uncovering his fraud, you also uncovered what he'd done to me. And my family was able to reclaim guardianship and ensure I'm properly cared for. I understand you run support groups now for people affected by romance fraud. I would like to donate to that cause if you'll accept it. It seems the least I can do. I hope you found peace. You deserved better than what my family brought into your life. With sincere regret and respect, Marcus Wellington. I did accept his donation. It funded 3 new support groups and a legal aid fund for fraud victims. I never met Marcus in person. It seemed too complicated, too entangled with everything that had happened. But I appreciated his gesture. The retired Professor Claire wanted to set me up with. We did have that coffee. And then another, and another. His name is Thomas. He's completely terrible at pretending to be anything other than exactly who he is. A slightly awkward academic with a passion for medieval history and terrible jokes. We've been dating for 6 months now, slowly, carefully, with complete honesty. Will it last? I don't know. But I've learned that not knowing is okay. Uncertainty isn't the enemy, dishonesty is. And for the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship where I feel safe being uncertain, safe being myself, safe saying, I don't know, or I'm not ready, or even, this isn't working. My story isn't a fairy tale. It's messier than that, more complicated, more real. But it's mine, and that's enough. The mute millionaire taught me what I didn't want. Thomas is teaching me what I do, and I'm teaching myself that at 57, I'm still learning, still growing, still deserving of truth and kindness and respect. That's not the ending I expected when I walked down that aisle in Marcus's library, but it's a better one than I could have imagined when he broke his silence and tried to break me. I survived. I rebuilt. I'm happy. And sometimes, that's exactly the ending you need. The end.